Hey, this is Jeremy, and it's time to talk about The Brutalist.
Don't be beautiful.
Well, holy shit, that was something. That was an experience. That was a journey. I saw The Brutalist yesterday afternoon in a sold out 70mm screening. Directed by former actor Brady Corbet and co-written by his wife Mona Fassvold, the film stars Adrian Brody, Guy Pearce, Felicity Jones, Alessandro Nivola, Joe Alwyn, and Stacey Martin. The film is almost 4 hours long, and I always feel like going to see a movie this long in a theater is like a hostage situation. You can't leave, you're stuck there. Before I left, I cleaned my house, I updated my will, I turned off the water, I packed a little bag, and off I went. I hadn't seen a movie projected on film in so long. I actually can't remember the last time. I guess it must be around the time that they stopped doing it. I haven't seen any of like recent movies that are projected on film. And it was such an amazing experience. It was so wild, so rich. It also transported me to like my childhood and like the small one screen theater in my small town. It was so great. I think whenever a new movie screens on film, I will definitely check it out from now on. But unfortunately, the projector broke during our screening, during part one before the intermission, because yes, there's an intermission in this movie. During the first dinner scene at Guy Pearce's house, just as Adrian Brody is starting to talk about his experience during the Holocaust, the screen went dark. We could hear what was being said, but we couldn't see anything on the screen. The house lights went on, and this kept going for like 6 minutes. Then the image came back on, but they didn't rewind it. They just kept going. Obviously, this is a very important scene in the movie. And thank God I kept paying attention to what was being said, like all through the commotion in the theater. But I'm really sad that I didn't see anything, so I didn't see the performance. I could just hear them. I feel like that would have been one of my favorite scenes in the movie, bizarrely. So I'll have to check that scene out later. So the movie is about a Jewish Hungarian architect that works in the Brutalist style, played by Adrian Brody, who comes to America shortly after or like even during the war. He meets up with a family member and then accidentally kind of meets a rich businessman played by Guy Pearce, who then hires him to build a community center in his town in Pennsylvania named after his mother. During this project, Adrian's wife, played by Felicity Jones, and his niece come to join him in America. Then, whether this project gets completed or not, I won't say. So the film explores, obviously, the immigrant experience in the mid-20th century. It deals with power, the American dream, ambition, trauma, abuse, and also just the life of an artist. And since there's an intermission, the film is separated into two parts. And the two parts feel kind of like two different movies in a way. The first part is sort of like the rise. And then the second part, things are kind of more stable for the Adrian Brody character. But his personality has changed a little bit. And also his wife is only in part two. So that kind of changes the dynamic for his character. And I feel like part one is more straightforward and conventional. And then part two is where all the metaphors kind of come to life, like even in like a literal way sometimes, which wasn't always a good thing. That's kind of where things started to go wrong a little bit for me. I loved part one so much, but then there's like a twist. There's maybe not a twist, but something happens in part two that feels that's surprising, which would be good, but it feels unearned in a way. It really comes out of nowhere, it seems. And that's one of the things that's kind of like a metaphor come to life, which I think is easy or like too simple kind of to do it in that way. I don't want this to sound maybe as bad as it sounds, but like I feel like part one, this felt like a very like adult kind of like, not standard, but just kind of like a classic movie. And then when that thing happens in part two, it's like, oh, like it kind of reminds you like, no, this is a young filmmaker. Like, I feel like that's something that a young filmmaker would do, which I think maybe if and when I see it again, which I probably won't, maybe I could see the whole thing differently and it might not bother me as much. You know, when you're watching a movie and then something wild happens and you're like, oh, like anything can happen now. Like all bets are off. You don't feel that way in part one because it's such a classic structure, and it feels like an old movie from the 70s, even though it takes place in the 50s. But then it surprises you, and I think that kind of like took me out because it's something that wouldn't happen in an old movie. So in that way, like knowing what's coming, it might be a different experience. So for you, it could be a good thing or a bad thing, like either way. And who knows, maybe it's just because I couldn't read the signs and I didn't see it coming. Maybe signs were there, but I don't think so. And I don't want to spend too much time on this thing because I'm not saying what it is and you guys will be just confused. But then that thing is kind of not talked about again until like the final scene. And then that also felt like a cop-out, like a cheap shot kind of. The way that it ended, like so abruptly referencing that thing that no one ever talked about again, given how long the movie is, it kind of felt like undercooked. Like there was more to be done with the ending than what was done. And also one of my least favorite characters in the movie is integral to the ending, which is maybe another reason that I didn't like it. But let's jump to the performances. But first, I found out who the original cast of the project was supposed to be. And it's kind of crazy how different the movie would have been. So Joel Edgerton was supposed to play the Adrian Brody character. Mark Rylance, the Guy Pearce character. Marion Cotillard, the Felicity Jones character. And then Sebastian Stan and Vanessa Kirby was supposed to play Guy Pearce's kids. So I'm really happy with the cast that we did get, except for Felicity Jones. I would definitely have preferred Marion Cotillard, and I think that would have made for a better movie. Adrian Brody is sensational. You see the word monumental written on like the posters and the advertising, and that's critics talking about the movie as a whole. But I would definitely use that word to describe Adrian Brody's performance. It's wild. There's so much going on in his face at all times. You cannot take your eyes off of him. It's insane. It's amazing. Guy Pearce is also sensational. I've never seen him this good. He's just so assured, and there's a lot happening with him as well. And I wish we kind of had more of him in the movie. We get like there's a lot of him, but I wish there was more. And then Felicity Jones, who I don't think was as good as everyone else, or maybe at all. And I'm glad she's only in the second part of the movie because the first part is so strong. Narratively, the second part is less impressive for the reasons that I've just talked about, but also because of Felicity, who in a way manages to kind of bring Adrian down a little bit. She can't meet him where he's at, and it just like performance-wise, and it kind of like fucks with the flow. And now that I know that Marion Cotillard could have played that role, I can't stop thinking about it. Like, I think it would have been an excellent person to have next to Adrian Brody. They would have felt more like two equals, which is what they're supposed to be in terms of their relationship. And her character is also in a wheelchair, which is one of the ways that the movie gets like literal with the metaphors. And it doesn't really do Felicity any favors. But hey. And then about the ending again, Adrian Brody and Guy Pearce, the two strongest actors in the film and the biggest like characters in the movie, they don't really get a final scene, if you will, in maybe the more traditional sense. I wanted a big moment for each of them at the end, and we don't really get that. The ending falls to Felicity Jones, and she doesn't really stick the landing for me. After this giant epic film, to hand your ending to the weakest character and the weakest performer is just kind of unfortunate. I think theme-wise and metaphorically, maybe the ending works, and I'm talking about the ending before the epilogue. But it felt unfulfilling as an audience member after the perfection of part one. And then that random little twist in part two, and then that ending, I kind of felt like Tyra Banks in the theater.
I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. How dare you?
But like I said earlier, maybe knowing how it turns out during a second viewing, the entirety of the movie would feel different to me. Who knows? And tech-wise, I mean, this film is a tremendous achievement. The cinematography by Lowell Crowley is sensational. The score by Daniel Blumberg is amazing. It is so cinematic until the epilogue, where it turns into like the Challenger score. But you'll see. The script is great. I mean, until those cheap shots in part 2, the direction is perfection as well throughout the whole thing. I really can't wait to see what Brady Corbett does next. I haven't seen his first 2 movies, so I think I will definitely check those out. This feels like a classic American film. You get that sense right from the opening scene with that fucking upside down Statue of Liberty that everybody keeps talking about. But it is striking, and it's like a great shot. Awards wise, I mean, at the Oscars, like, this will be nominated for everything: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, God forbid, Best Supporting Actress, Best Score, Cinematography, Editing, etc., etc. I haven't seen Timothée Chalamet in A Complete Unknown yet, and I probably won't. But I don't think he can hold a candle to what Adrian Brody does in this movie. It's just like an all-timer performance. Same for Guy Pearce, I think. If Kieran Culkin wasn't winning everything for playing himself in A Real Pain, Pearce should walk away with this. Now, all this being said, maybe this will shock you, but I gave The Brutalist 3 stars on Letterboxd. It works, but I didn't like the ending. Part 1 was stronger than part 2, and it makes it so that I don't want to see it again. So there you go. But you should see it. And definitely on the big screen, in 70 millimeter, if that's possible for you. Do it. See ya.